Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about a controversial federal government program called the Court Challenges Program and a new report that has exposed some of the cases that this program has funded. Under this program, the federal government pays to sue itself, all using your taxpayer money. The Court Challenges Program offers federal taxpayer funding to approved charter challenges and interventions. The program is essentially the federal government handing millions of taxpayer dollars to lawyers and activists to sue them, and the details are all hidden from the public eye. A new report from the MacDonald-Laurier Institute has looked into the types of cases that have been approved by the program. And I think no one was shocked to learn that the funded cases could all be characterized as landing on one side of the ideological spectrum, essentially using your money to wage social justice war via the courts. Here today to talk about these findings are the authors of that report, Professors Dave Snow and Ryan Alford. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Let's start with you, Professor Snow. How much money are we talking about here? How much taxpayer dollars have been doled out uh, in your report that you've uncovered to pay for cases like these?
Thanks, Christine. So the CCP or Court Challenges Program has a budget of roughly $6 million annually. The Department of Canadian Heritage that funds the CCP gives it typically between $4 and $5 million a year, and there's a surplus every year, and that's how we get up to around six. So usually its expenses are actually between $3 and $5 million, but it often doesn't spend its full budget. Its typical surplus is usually nearly $2 million. One year it was almost three and a half. And the other thing I'd note in terms of this budget is that last year it just details how much it spends on the cases it funds broadly, and then on administration. And last year its administration budget was nearly 28% of $1.17 million. Normally it's closer to 800,000, or about 15 to 20% of its total expenditures. But I still don't really understand why this type of program would require so much in administration costs.
And with that money, how many cases do we know have been funded, or maybe how many cases get funded each year, Professor Alford?
Well, in the past 6 years, it was 345 cases, and which is quite a substantial number. It should also be noted that the success rate of people applying to have their challenges funded by the Accord Challenges Program is very high. It's actually been over half over that time period.
Do we know anything about the cases that don't get funding, or is that just kind of lost into the ether, Professor Alford?
Maybe we can just foreshadow this before we talk about the ideological bias in the program. But given the fact that the vast majority of the cases, virtually all, align ideologically with the progressive end of the spectrum, and also quite interventionist and advocating for more governmental intervention and, in fact, more governmental largesse, it's quite possible that the ones that don't get funded are the ones that argue in the opposite direction.
But at this point, there's not that much transparency from what I understand. Professor Snow, what can you tell me about the transparency that does exist around this, and how this committee that is supposed to determine which cases get funded, how they reach their conclusions? Do we get any insight into that at all?
Very little is the short answer, and I would say, in answer to your previous question, we don't. They don't give any reasons for why they fund cases or why they don't. Their only transparency is a roughly 20 to 25-page PDF annual report that they put out each year. And up until this most recent year, they have not provided any information on who they funded. They use the language of litigation privilege on its website, its guidelines, its annual reports. This has been defined by its director in a parliamentary committee hearing as intended to safeguard litigants' privacy rights so that the parties can go about mounting and pursuing their case free of interference. But quite frankly, no one has ever been persuaded by this as a reason why, if I get funding in my own research through a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council grant, they put my name on the website, they say how much funding I got. I don't know why that would stop any of these organizations or individuals from, pursuing their litigation, knowledge of where the funding comes from. So all that we do have is that the annual reports list 4 to 6 example cases, anonymized, but sometimes easy enough for researchers to figure out, of who they funded and what that argument was. And so they've done that for the last 6 years. And then this past year, they listed the cases that they'd funded that had ended, but with one line of text, and oftentimes in a way that's impossible to figure out who they funded. Sometimes you can glean it, but they hide it all under the language of litigation
Wow.
privilege.
Wow. We've got to go to commercial break, but we'll be right back and I want to talk about how you as researchers determined which cases were at issue here. We'll be right back.